Hey everybody, I'm Aaron Simmons. This is Philosophy for Where We Find Ourselves, June 14th, 2020. Today I want to talk about something that anyone over the age of 40 has probably wrestled with in one way or another, and that's the awareness of midlife and how we address it, how we make sense of it. Now, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a sociologist, I'm a philosopher. So the way I'm going to approach this is personal, but also anchored in some of these big ideas that the philosophical tradition has to offer for helping us navigate living into adulthood meaningfully. Now, I should recommend a wonderful resource. It's by Kieran and Setiya. It's simply called Midlife, a Philosophical Guide. There'll be a link in the description. This is a wonderful text that thinks this through substantively. I highly recommend it. The reason I decided to talk about this today is because just in the last week, several friends of mine have reached out to me, and all of them have expressed a kind of general frustration with where they are. Their job is not satisfying. They don't seem to kind of know why they do what they do. They're still looking to, in some ways, rediscover their calling. And I should note that all of this represents a kind of privilege, that those of us able to spend the time reflecting on where we are and why we are, this is of course something that is able to be engaged because the jobs remain in place, because the family health remains stable. So I don't want to suggest that this is something that everyone will experience or engage in the same way, but I do think that it's common enough that it's worth thinking about together today. So let me just give you a few ideas that have jumped to mind as I've wrestled with this over the past few years, and especially since being at home every day, all day during the pandemic. The first is this. Maybe we can turn back to that old Peggy Lee song, "Is That All There Is?" I think that one of the reasons that midlife becomes so difficult for many, I know this is true in my case, is that we spend our lives trying to achieve, striving towards something. And then in many ways, when we've done the things that we set out to do, we kind of look around and think, but now what? This is why I tell my students that we've got to think well about who we are becoming, not simply what it is that we are doing. The second thought, though, is I also think there's a kind of existential humility that sets in, but it's actually not invigorating, it's really quite devastating. This is when the people to whom you looked up, that you sort of trusted to have the world figured out, you start realizing that they too are kind of just doing the best they can where they are. Now, for me, this kind of came home when I realized that I am now older than Martin Luther King was when he died, I'm older than Dietrich Bonhoeffer was when he died, and I'm older than Soren Kierkegaard was when he died. And yet these are the people I look to model my own life, to guide how I'm moving forward. This is why I think when we kind of recognize that adulthood is not about having it figured out, but about the maturity to recognize that you gotta make decisions and do the best you can and show confidence in light of humility, that I think is actually something that is hard to do. The third and final thought here is that I think also we find ourselves in midlife being frustrated by what we see as a sort of loss of new relationships. In college in particular, every day, every week, every year, it's just this blooming confusion of new people and ideas and relationships that bloom up and then wither down, and others that come into the frame and others that fall away. And then you get into your mid-30s, early 40s, and you kind of, sit into a few friendships you've had for a long time, but making new friends, it's just kind of not in the cards as much. I heard it once said, a joke that said anybody who thinks Jesus didn't perform miracles doesn't understand that he was a man in his 30s who had 12 close friends. I think that is pretty miraculous. Those three ideas for me are kind of at the heart and the core of why finding satisfaction and joy in midlife becomes difficult. So how do we navigate this? How do we offer responses? How do we find resources for helping? Again, I mentioned one book I'd recommend. Tomorrow what I'll do is actually take these three and give some philosophical suggestions for at least the way that I've been able to try, I haven't gotten it figured out, but try to move forward with as much energy as I possibly can. I'll see you tomorrow unless a piano falls on our heads.